Great. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. My name is Mia Hassan-Gross, and I'm the director of Rene Cassin, the Jewish Voice for Human Rights, who together with CSW is hosting this event this evening. Rene Cassin works to promote and protect human rights, drawing on Jewish values and Jewish experience. CSW is a Christian human rights organization specializing in freedom of religion and belief. Holocaust Memorial Day, which will be marked in 2 days' time on the 27th of January, encourages remembrance in a world scarred by genocides, and also reminds us that genocides must be resisted today. Nowhere is it more urgent than in East Turkestan, China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where between 1 and 3 million Muslim Uyghurs and people of other ethnic groups are being held in so-called education camps and are denied the freedom to practice their religion, their language, their tradition. In the face of oppression of such vast scale, we can only hope to overcome it by joining together and acting from a place of shared purpose. In this online event, 4 prominent leaders and thinkers will share how their beliefs inspire them to take action on behalf of Uyghurs. But we will also hear from a speaker by experience, a member of the Uyghur community, some of the experiences that her family is going through as we speak. But this event is not just about our motivations, but also a call to action. And at the end of the event, we will share with you platforms and ideas and immediate actions that each and every one of us can take and must take in this campaign to end the persecution of the Uyghurs. Our chair for the evening is Benedict Rogers, a human rights activist and journalist, and who have the pleasure of being together on the World Uyghur Congress UK's advisory group. Ben, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Mia, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Mia says, I'm Benedict Rogers. I'm CSW Senior Analyst for East Asia and deeply involved in this very important issue. And it's an incredibly great privilege to introduce our very distinguished panel. I'd like to welcome Ziba Murat, who is the daughter of a retired Uyghur doctor, Gulshan Abbas, who was recently sentenced to 20 years in prison because of her family members' activism in the United States and around the world. It's a privilege to welcome Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, the senior rabbi of Masorti Judaism. A great honor to be joined by the Right Honorable and Right Reverend Lord Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Andrew Copson, an old friend of mine and the Chief Executive of Humanists UK and the President of Humanists International, and by Sonam Frasi, the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for a big area, Northern Europe, Poland, the Baltic states, and the United Kingdom. So to all of you, thank you so much for joining us, and we really look forward to hearing your messages and contributions very shortly. Just for our viewers, to give you an idea of the format of this event, each speaker will share a reflection for between about 5 and 7 minutes. And this will be followed by a Q&A session moderated by my colleague from CSW, Kiri Kankwende. And for the Q&A, you can put your questions in the Q&A function, not the chat function, but the Q&A function, and Kiri will monitor that and address the questions with our speakers. So I think we can move straight into the program now, and it's a privilege to invite Ziba Murat, who's going to place this issue in a very personal context by sharing her own experiences as a Uyghur and the suffering of her people. Ziba, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for hosting such a timely and meaningful event. I'm here not as a professional activist or a scholar, but as a daughter and as someone directly affected by the atrocities that are being discussed today against Uyghurs, and as part of this week to remember the worst stains on human history, the Holocaust. I'm one of those who understand deeply how this horror must inform our response to present events. Some of you may heard my mother's name, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, a retired medical doctor, sister to Uyghur American activist Gulshan Abbas. Today, I'm here to share with you honestly from a perspective from a family member. In September of 2018, I last heard my mom's voice. She sent me a message saying I should get some sleep when my baby is sleeping, referring to then infant daughter of mine. I haven't heard her I haven't heard her voice since. When she last visited us in the United States in 2016, she promised us to come back soon, but shortly after she went back, her passport was confiscated. She couldn't even be here for her second granddaughter's birth. The reality of the reason that I have been unable to hear my mom's voice or let her see her granddaughters for more than 2 years now is that my mother was punished for my aunt's choice to speak out against this horror facing the Uyghurs. My mother disappeared 6 days after my aunt publicly speak about the concentration camp. In December of 2019, the Chinese state media outlet Global Times published an article which they said my aunt was making my mom up. Now we know that my mom was sentenced in March of 2019, long before that, and the Chinese regime has continued with their bold-faced lies while the international community eats it up. On December on At end of December, responses to our acknowledgement of having to learn from a third-party sources that she was sentenced to prison, the Chinese Foreign Ministry finally confirmed this, directly contradicting their previous story. Although my mother herself was never politically active and speak fluent Chinese, having served the Chinese society for her entire career, she was still swept up in this genocide. This was this has been hard to deal with, and of course, it's a nightmare I wish I could wake up from. But slowly, I have begun to realize that responsibility this places upon me must be shouldered, because my mother's case is a very visible example that the reality of what's happening to Uyghur people. If someone like my mother can be taken so unprecedentedly and given 20 years prison sentence, which is clearly so preposterous when anyone looks at her case, then no one is safe. This is an issue that affects people of many countries all over the world. I was at a panel not too long ago. All six of us on that panel, either father, mother, were given harsh sentences or looking for missing loved ones. These are scholar, intellectual, and professionals. There are more than 3 million people in the concentration camp and millions more in slavery. Every Uyghur in diaspora is affected by this. My mother returned to China from her last visit to the United States willingly, even though he had heard that things were getting to start to get bad. She returned with a good face that she had done nothing wrong. She thought being a good person and a member of the society will keep her safe. This is not true in China. I am asking as a daughter, let me hug my mother again. Let her see her grandchildren grow up. I'm asking for millions of others who have no such opportunity to speak on this panel and are suffering silently or dead. Never again should mean something. The legacy of millions of innocent people brutally murdered demands this. This isn't just about me. This isn't just about the Uyghurs. But by addressing these individual cases, by demanding my mom's freedom, we are also protecting the future of the world and the conscience of the humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ziba, for that incredibly powerful and important message. I'm now going to invite two of our four other speakers to share now how their beliefs inspire them to act for the Uyghurs and in solidarity with the Uyghurs, beginning first with Rabbi Wittenberg, and then followed by Sonam Frasi. Rabbi Wittenberg first.
Can I say to you, Ziba, I feel deeply touched and moved by, what you just said. But can I just say to you on behalf of my people that you are not alone, that we are so I fear my connection's gone. Can I just check if I can be heard? I fear my connection might have gone.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I thought my screen had frozen. I just want to say to you, Ziva, from my heart, I'm very, very moved by what you say. You remind me of family letters from after the war, where my family, who were my father's family, the Nazi Holocaust, were looking for loved ones, longed to hear their voice and could not find them. And I want to say on behalf of my people, on behalf of the Jewish people, in the best way we can, that you are not alone, and that participating here, speaking, or indeed listening is a responsibility to care and to commit to caring for you and for your people.
Thank you so much.
I want to say something about the oppressed, the oppressor, and us. So much of what I've read and learned by listening about the Uyghur people is deeply familiar, far too familiar from Jewish history. People who disappear and one doesn't hear from them again. My mother, who was 16 when she fled Nazi Germany, remembered dreading the postman arriving because after hearing nothing from a relative, the postman would bring a parcel and say, "Here are their ashes." The attempt to destroy the culture and then the body of the people, enslavement, slave labor, concentration camps, ultimate torture, death, all of these things echo from our past. And it would be a breach of the meaning of the history to say that we don't want to act, that we're not prepared to learn from it. If it means anything, it means solidarity with you, Ziva, and with your people. This touches us deeply from the core of our history. And I wanted to say something about the oppressor. China is a powerful country in the world, and Germany was a powerful country in Europe. And one felt that, what can one do? How does one stand up against them? And those who oppress feel that if one lies often enough, if one deceives often enough, if one covers over often enough, maybe nobody will dare to speak up. And nobody will intervene, at least powerfully enough to make a difference. But we have learned, especially again over the last years, of the power of lies in the world and the importance of truth. And we're determined to tell it in the face of power, as Judaism and religious traditions always have, telling truth in the face of power. Powerful leaders often think, in the words of Macbeth, that none can call our power to account. But there is ultimately a God and a process of justice in history, which does call power to account. I think of the words of Bishop Desmond Tutu. When asked about dictators, he said, with a wry laugh, "They will crumble in the dust. They will crumble in the dust." So you are called upon to behave according to justice and humanity. And I wanted to say something about us, because we here in England, we have a choice to be bystanders or to be silent or to commit and to care. And how would we be able to look back at very powerful evidence and say, I knew, but I really didn't care. And it's not only about other people, and I think you said this, Ziba, it's about the nature of humanity. It's about the meaning of being human, which is a responsibility that embraces us all. One of the most powerful writers to describe the 27th of January, 1945, when the vanguard of the Red Army reached the camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau, is Primo Levi. In the opening pages of The Truths, he describes the 4 Russian horsemen. And on their faces, he says, there's a shame. He says, it's a shame that touched us all. It's a shame we knew so well, that the just person experiences that such crime should have entered the nature of things. It must be a shame to us all that the Uyghur people and other peoples on this earth are persecuted. And it is the definition of our humanity that we stand up against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. And I'm humbled and privileged to be in the company of so many distinguished speakers. And Ziba, with your personal experience, I feel personally for you, and I can see visibly how grief it has taken you. On this somber Holocaust Memorial Day, we are standing shoulder to shoulder and reflecting with the Uyghur people the atrocities and the genocide suffered by all faith communities of Muslim, Christians, Buddhists, Taoists, Falun Gong Dafa, and others under the control of Chinese Communist Party. I would like to briefly share the experiences of the Tibetan people, religious and cultural genocide perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. Tibet was invaded by the People's Liberation Army and is illegally occupied by the Communist Party since the fall of 1949. The Tibetan civilization at its core is the practice of Buddhist philosophy of peace, non-violence, and compassion, which has been nurtured over past 1,000 years. Over the centuries, we have developed and invested heavily in the preservation and development of Buddhists in Tibet. Therefore, the Tibetan culture, its language, its literature, its writing, its thinking, and the social way of life of the Tibetan people are embedded in the religious practice and philosophies of Buddhism. Communist China has targeted Tibetan monasteries and religious centers from the very beginning of their occupation to destroy the Tibetan loyalty, support, and faith in Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhist culture is interwoven in the social fabric of our society and is seen as a big and separate value challenge to the communism. Monasteries and nunneries plays a huge role in the social and society at large. They are the seats of learning, centers of scholasticism, libraries of manuscripts, writings of thousands of teachers and philosophers, and center of cultural imagery and artifacts. They have also the center of study of paintings, sculptures, embroidery, music, dance, chants, and rituals. They are the repositories of the treasures of Tibetan civilization. In fact, the International Commission for Juries found criminal acts of genocide had been committed to the Tibetans by the Chinese Communist Party in the attempt to destroy Tibetans as a religious group. And the International Commission for Juries has found that with the evidence that the Chinese will not permit adherence to the religious Buddhist practice in Tibet, that they have systematically set out to eradicate the religious belief in Tibet, that in pursuit of their design, they have killed religious figures because their religious belief and practice was an encouragement and example to others, and that they have forcibly transferred large numbers of Tibetans' children to Chinese materialistic environment in which, in order to prevent them from having a religious upbringing. In addition to the above, the Chinese Communist Party has updated their method of attack on Tibetans on a variety of other means, such as destruction of monasteries, nunneries, abduction of the second most important religious person, the 11th Panchen Lama. They control and limit the entry into monastic education for young monks and nuns. Nunneries, monasteries are barred from giving traditional monastic education, but they are replaced with patriotic re-education. Under the campaign of the so-called patriotic re-education, they forced the monks and nuns to denounce His Holiness the Dalai Lama and forced them to declare their allegiance towards Communist Party's leadership and forced them to display the portrait of the Chinese communist leaders and the Chinese national flag in their homes and in their monasteries. It's now 70 years that the Chinese have ruled and tried to change us. It has not succeeded and it will never succeed. The current Chinese Communist Party's mantra of Sinicization of all and every aspects of Tibetan religion, culture, language, thoughts, and to the same as the Uyghurs, they are doing the same. There are a huge social engineering and cultural genocide. Uyghurs and Tibetans suffer in tandem under the yoke of Chinese occupation. They are forcing us to be like a Han Chinese by stealth. In conclusion, in solidarity with Uyghur, I would like to share the following prayer of wisdom and solidarity and the oneness of humanity by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it's called Never Give Up. Never give up, no matter what is going on. Never give up. Too much energy in our country is spent developing mind and state. Be compassionate, not just to your friends, but to everyone. Be compassionate, work for peace, and never give up. No matter how strong the wind of evil may blow, the flame of truth will never be extinguished. So never give up. And I feel like with Ziba, there we have many Uyghur friends, and I pay great respect for the people who are suffering and people who are trying to bring international attention to the Uyghurs people. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good luck. Good wishes.
I speak out for the Uyghur people because we share a common humanity. We are indeed one human race.
This is my grandfather, Rabbi Salzberger, who was interned in Dachau in 1938 and mercifully released. These are pictures of my father's family, many of whom went to Auschwitz and were never released. I cannot remain silent when terrible things happen to another community.
I understand and share the pains of the injustices and oppression that you are suffering at the hands of the Chinese Communist regime. All Tibetans feel the same pain as you do, but never give up your cause.
I speak out for the Uyghur people because the Christian message is founded on the understanding of the sacredness and the sanctity and dignity of every life, as we are all created in the image and likeness of God.
I speak out for the Uyghur people because, as a Jew whose grandparents were murdered in the Holocaust, I want to stand in solidarity with people who are being persecuted now.
As a humanist, I believe governments exist to protect our human freedom, dignity and our choice. And when any government anywhere attacks any minority, because of our shared humanity, that's an attack on all of us.
Islam inspires me to stand firm for justice and rescue those people who are being oppressed and persecuted.
I speak out for the Uyghur people because I identify with their humanity, and we know as Jews what it feels like to be victims of genocide and the enormous difference it makes when people are allies. We will always be your allies.
Every human person and community is precious in God's sight and needs protection. If we fail in this, we damage our own humanity as well as putting others at risk.
I speak out for the Uyghur people because their cause strikes an echo in the Jewish heart as they struggle against imprisonment and persecution and eradication of their language, their culture, their religion. Their cause is therefore our cause.
I stand for justice because the Holy Quran ordained us to be just. According to the Quran, you who believe stand out firmly for Allah as just witnesses, and let not the enmity and hatred to one others make you avoid justice. Be just, that is nearer to piety.
A few years ago, I had the great pleasure of celebrating Holy Communion with the Right Reverend Desmond Tutu, and I remember this is one of his sayings. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you're neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. God bless.
I speak out for the Uyghur people because God loves everyone indiscriminately. So there is no one who we shouldn't care for.
Well, Rabbi Wittenberg and Sonam Frasi, thank you so much for your remarks, and thank you also for that very powerful video and for everyone who took part in it. We're going to move to our second two speakers. Just before I hand over to them, just a reminder for those who are viewing this that you can submit your questions in the Q&A section. And if you have a question that's directed to a particular speaker as opposed to all the speakers, please just highlight who you'd like to address your question to. So it's now a privilege to invite firstly Andrew Copson to share his reflections and then Lord Williams.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to our hosts for inviting me to share some reflections from a humanist perspective. And thank you, Ziba, for what you've shared with us, which, as everyone else has said, is a very powerful reminder of why we're here. Humanists are non-religious people who believe that the universe is a natural place with no supernatural side, and that this life is the only life we know we have. They're people who believe that morality is not something given to us from outside by some extra human source, but something intrinsic to our own evolved social nature, built on by thousands of years of culture to nurture good values. And humanists see the meaning of life not as something out there waiting to be discovered, but see that every human being creates meaning by giving meaning to the events in our lives and through the connections we make and through our pursuits. Today, there's a modern humanist movement connecting 120 organisations in 60 countries, and Humanist UK is one of the oldest humanist organisations in the world. We celebrate our 125th anniversary this year. But the humanist values I've described and the beliefs are as old as the written recollections of humanity itself. We find them expressed up to 3,000 years ago in Europe, in India, and yes, in China. Everywhere we find men and women taking time to think about the big questions of our existence, we find the humanist alternative offered forward. From a humanist perspective, there are two things that I want to say today, a political thing and a moral thing. First, the political thing. From a humanist point of view, governments are constituted to safeguard and advance the freedom of their people. Freedom of choice in how to live, freedom of conscience, of thought, of belief, freedom of expression and association, the freedom to pursue our own idea of the good life, the life well lived. And this is connected, of course, to the humanist conviction that there is no future life in which we can see happiness, fulfillment, or completion. If completion is to occur, if happiness is to come about, if our fulfillment is to be achieved, it must happen in this life. For this reason, and because we all want to be able to live the life of our choosing, government should enable and empower and free their people to achieve these ends. The concept of the open society is probably the greatest contribution of humanist political thought to the wider culture in the 20th century. And the humanist thinkers that developed it, like Karl Popper, directly based their account of the need for this concept on the atrocities of the first half of the 20th century, which we commemorate today, and the repetition of which we're bearing witness to. Government should never be able to tell you what to think. Government should never be able to take away your dignity, your liberty, your life for having the wrong thoughts or making the wrong choices if they harm no one else. And China is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that embodies these beliefs and values. Its government should uphold them. The moral thing I want to say is about our shared humanity. This isn't a belief, as we've already heard, this isn't a belief unique to humanists, although humanists perhaps lean on it more heavily than others. For us, our shared humanity is the beginning, middle, and end of our moral commitments. There are no separately created races or nations. We human beings, all connected and related to one another, are all children of this earth, living together in the only home we've ever known and ever will know. The existence of the human species as one family, the legitimate claim to equal and dignified treatment that every human being has on every other human being, in light of each human being's wish to have that for themselves. These moral convictions call us as humanists as a duty to speak up for persecuted people, whoever they are and wherever. We gather here today in the light of Holocaust Memorial Day. Humanist organizations were banned early in the Third Reich in 1933, and Adolf Hitler celebrated in a speech that year in Berlin that he had successfully won the fight against the atheist movement and stamped it out. The attempted annihilation of humanist culture in Germany, and humanist culture was strong in Germany, even the English word humanism came to us in the 19th century from the German word humanismus. The annihilation of humanist culture in Germany was very successful. It's taken many years for humanist organizations in Germany to restore themselves to the membership numbers and social recognition that they enjoyed in the late 19th and early 20th century. The atrocities of the mid-20th century give us a permanent example, a horrifying and well-documented example of how we can be dehumanized and brutalized by ideology and political conformity. But they give us another lesson too, because they teach us of the perils of the failure of human solidarity. Most people didn't speak up for the humanists of Germany when their associations were broken up, or then the trade unionists or the political opponents of the regime, or then for the Jews when the genocide began, for the Roma or lesbians and gay men. Even most of those who knew it was wrong looked the other way. We know now that it is only when we do speak up for the freedom and humanity of others that our society can be a peaceful space for all. Today, in over 30 countries, it's unlawful or illegal to set up humanist organizations, identify as a humanist or express humanist beliefs. And this living experience of marginalization, discrimination, persecution, judicial murder, and extrajudicial killing, which I've seen around the world through Humanists International, motivates me to speak out not just for humanists, but for all who suffer. And that's why I called last year at the United Nations Human Rights Council for action against China's genocidal actions against the Uyghur people, and why humanist organizations have done so consistently for the last few years at the UN and elsewhere, and will continue to do so. But even if it weren't the case that as we sit here today, there are humanists suffering around the world, living in fear of torture and death, I would still feel called upon to speak out for the universal rights for all people. There are no humanist mottos or commandments, but I find personal inspiration in the aphorism of the Roman playwright Terence, writing 2 millennia ago. I am a human being, and nothing human is alien to me.
It's a real privilege to be able to join this panel and to speak out against the atrocities we've heard described, and a particular privilege to speak alongside Ziba, whose personal testimony has, I think, for all of us, put flesh on the abstractions of some of what we might say. And I share the gratitude that's already been expressed to her. When Christians say, following what the Hebrew scriptures affirm, that human beings are made in God's image, they're not simply saying that every individual is a kind of passive reflection of God. God is active, and God is a ceaseless giver of gifts. So to say that humans are in the divine image is to say that every human person carries a unique gift, which will help to make every other human being more fully alive. In that sense, the oppression, abuse, humiliation, silencing, and above all murder of other humans is an offense against all humanity, depriving the human family of the gifts God wishes to give. And the oppressor, abuser, or murderer is damaging, even destroying their own humanity, as well as injuring all their fellow humans by attacking some. If we stand up and call to account those who are responsible for genocidal crime, It is not just a matter of judgment, but a matter of pleading with the oppressor for their sake as well as their victims. To speak in this way is to speak out of love for the violent oppressor as well as the victim, but a love that calls to judgment and demands change. If every human individual represents and carries a gift from God, the same is true of distinctive communities. God has not made human beings uniform and regimented. Human culture across the world is rich and beautiful because of its diversity. And a world that is truly at peace is one in which communities welcome, delight in, and learn from the differences in language and custom and history that surround them in the lives of other communities. The particular horror of genocide is in its assumption that not only individuals, but an entire history can be blotted out. And this is a crime against not only love, but truth, a denial of the past that we all share. We hear often enough these days that we live in a post-truth environment. But this is not as new as we think. The story is often told that Hitler, when one of his colleagues expressed misgivings about how history would look back on the murder of the Jews, said, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" He believed that successful butchery would be able to write its own version of the truth in the long run, that truth was always at the mercy of successful violence. He was wrong about the Armenians, and he was wrong about the Jews, and he was wrong about all his other victims. Precisely because such violence cuts into the living fabric of humanity itself, it cannot be forgotten. It is what is so powerfully expressed in the biblical language of the blood of the victim crying from the ground, in the prayer that can be seen in some memorials of the Shoah, "O earth, cover not their blood." Power and abuse cannot eradicate truth. What we say in protest is part of the acknowledgement of this fact. The attack on any human community is everyone's business because it assaults everyone's humanity. It's not that we condemn any nation or regime as inherently and irredeemably evil. God knows that all our national histories are scarred by violent and terrible acts. Only this last year, we have been forced to look again at the history of slavery and its part in the economic development and success of our own country. Recognizing that the past has its horrors for every community, that no people is completely innocent, is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. The strength to face unwelcome truths, in the confidence that we have enough moral energy and clarity to change. In calling the government of the People's Republic of China to account in regard to the treatment of the Uyghur people, we appeal to a history of wise and humane thinking in China itself over thousands of years, and plead for actions that will honor that tradition which itself has given the world so much. To advocate for justice for any national or religious group facing brutal repression and threatened with extinction is not to take up a partisan stance. It is to risk trying to speak for humanity itself, for the good of all. It's fatally easy for the oppressor to write off challenges as motivated by narrow national or ideological interests. This is why it is crucial for the voices of faith and conviction to be heard with the unanimity we have heard today, proclaiming with clarity that they're not trying to defend any partial or exclusive vision, but are speaking, protesting, and praying for the good of all. That is why we are here today, seeking to advocate not just for one profoundly suffering and abused community, but for the security and well-being of all who bear the divine image and the divine gift.
Thank you, Lord Williams, and thank you to all of our speakers for your contributions tonight. We're now going to move on to the Q&A section. Unfortunately, Ziba will have to leave us at 7:30, so I'm going to prioritize questions to her first. I've clustered them together, and Ziba, so many people were moved by your testimony, as we all are. Tony and Abby in particular wanted to know, what can ordinary people do to help your mother and those in a similar situation to her?
Thank you for the question. One thing you can do at this moment right now is to write to the Chinese ambassador in UK, ask for her case and demand for her release. And my mom is just not the isolated case. There are many, many other Uyghur people that I'm sure in UK too are looking for loved ones. You can advocate for those cases, be their voices. I will also ask you to raise awareness on the Uyghur crisis as a whole. You can start educating your family members. You can start there. Also, any government that has a dialogue with China needs to be asked about those missing members, family members, and those imprisoned. So yeah, that's what you can do.
Thank you. Mavis and Tony, you've hinted it in your final answer there, you've hinted to the power of China. Mavis and Tony wanted to know, will pressure from all of our governments make a difference? China seems so powerful.
That's why the genocide amendment that we would like to see that passing, because the forced labor must be stopped. The one thing that making China powerful is the money, and that comes from the economy. So the genocide amendment is very important. That will stop those products coming in to flowing out to the world with the blood of the Uyghur people, with tears of the Uyghur people and tears of like us, the family members. So it's important to pass the genocide amendment. So.
Thank you, Ziba. I'm going to move on to some of the other questions. And we have one from Stephen, who wanted to know whether, and this is a question to Ben, in fact, but I would encourage any other speakers to join in if they have anything more to add to this. He wanted to know if the Magnitsky Act in the UK could be used to target sanctions at key figures in the Communist Party committing crimes against humanity against the Uyghur people.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And yes, the government now has the legislation to impose Magnitsky sanctions, but it hasn't yet applied it to those officials responsible for the Uyghur situation. And I think it should be a priority to do so. If we don't use Magnitsky sanctions against those responsible for the terrible crimes that the Uyghurs are facing, then who will we use them against?
We have a question from Steve, which I might put to Andrew. Steve would like to know, sorry, I've just misplaced that question. Yes. China has such a powerful economy and trading advantages. Does this in fact dissuade other countries from challenging them about their treatment of the Uyghur people?
There's no doubt at all that it does, and that China's enormous economic clout and also its growing global political clout is an extreme disincentive to other states and other governments from criticizing it. There are signs of hope. As we've just heard, there are now many states that are considering the possibility of sanctions for the breach of human rights in general, and surely they must apply those to China if they're acceptable in principle. As Ben's just said, China is an egregious case. There are also possibilities that our own parliament might pass, as Ziba calls for, and I think we all here would support, the genocide amendment to the current trade legislation to allow action to be taken. But any of us who've ever been active in, for example, the United Nations Human Rights Council or any international institution see in front of us the way that China uses its power to silence criticism of its actions, even its genocidal actions, like in the case of the Uyghurs. And there's no doubt that many other countries are complicit in it. And many countries are in a vulnerable position and almost can't help but be powerless in front of China because the inequality is so great. But there are those of us who are citizens of countries for whom that's not true, countries that could, if they wished, take a stand and not suffer greatly by it at least, have an even greater obligation, I think, to do so as a result. And as Rowan said, in doing so, we would be recalling the government of China and the Chinese state to really its own better traditions and better instincts from their own history too. There is, of course, opposition within China, and we should remember that too. There are people of goodwill within China with whom we can make links, and everything that anyone can do, whether individuals or civil society or states, to support those people too, I think has to be welcome. So yes, it is a disincentive to speak out, but really that's no excuse.
Thank you, Andrew. I have a question which has come to all of the panelists, but I will start by putting it to Rabbi Wittenberg. It's from Azra in Birmingham, who says, "What do you see as the way forward? We cannot have another Holocaust."
It's an extremely important question, and I think we're all contributing to parts of the way forward. What emerges from what everybody has said is to speak out in any ways we can. Ziba has indicated the ways in which we can write to our MPs and to the Chinese ambassador on the Chinese embassy, on behalf of citizens and people in the UK looking for loved ones. We've had a conversation that there are countries powerful enough to challenge China, and I think Lord Williams put it, to draw on the better part of China's own traditions. China's also going to host a major biodiversity summit in April. I think it's COP15. It's not as well known as COP26, but that'll be a huge gathering. And if we're talking about biodiversity, there has to be a conversation about cultural diversity and inclusion as well. So all of these are, perhaps they're small ways, but collaboratively and drawing nations and faiths together. Very few countries are really as immune as they want to think to the impact of others when they speak with shared voices.
Thank you. Sonam, Frasi, would you like to add to this answer, perhaps, on what we can sort of what we must do next? What is the way forward?
I want to say something like this. It is a myth that everybody thinks China is very powerful. Yes, it may be in terms of economy, but the lack of morality in China and the fact that China spends almost 50% more in domestic security expenditure than defending on the defense budget, the security and the stability in Chinese society is only kept by total suppression and repression. And that we cannot, as an international onlooker, to see this China as a very prosperous and very successful country. It is not. So the fact that to move forward, countries must not think that, oh, China is untouchable. They are so powerful. They are so big. This myth should not be there, because the basic fact is we can only challenge what is going wrong in Chinese society. And that is the suppression and the demonization of all the faiths, of all the ethnic communities. And if we do not accept these premises and think that, oh, China is untouchable, then we have no way of curtaining their power. So the international community must keep at it all the time, because China is not a society without any problem. We must not think like this. It is full of problem, and the only stability they have is through repression, and that cannot be what the society should be guided at.
Thank you. We have a question which I'm going to put to Ziba again. East Turkestan is a very important region for China economically, especially for cotton production. Is there anything we can do as consumers to express our support for the Uyghur people? That's from Jeff and Sarah. Oh, sorry, you're...
Okay, sorry. You can start by writing to MPs again, addressing these issues. United States recently just banned all the cotton from that region. So UK should follow steps, and that needs persuasion. So that comes to you as a member of the community to write to your MPs and just educate them on what's happening. So pressure works.
Thank you. Hector Mackenzie has asked, and I'm going to put this to Lord Williams, where is hope? Where is the role for hope in all of this? Where is the role for hope in the situation we're exploring this evening?
I think we are called ourselves to be part of the answer to that question, aren't we? Our capacity, our willingness to tell the story that some people want to silence, our capacity to stand alongside people that others want to be forgotten, that is part of where hope begins. So the very fact that we've been able to listen to Ziba's story and amplify it in some way by this event, the very fact that we can speak together despite our deep differences in all sorts of ways in our approach to reality, that surely is itself a sign of hope. As a Christian believer, I also hold not simply that, that there is some settlement in the future, but that there is here and now an energy that makes towards justice, that gives us some resource and some vision in the direction of justice, and that too is part of the hope I live with. But I recognize, because I know Andrew is here, that not everyone shares that perspective. Therefore, I begin by saying we must be part of the answer to that question in the first instance. I also would like to echo what Sonam has said. A society that tries to repress the truth, that tries to silence the voice of true narrative and deny facts, is not a strong but a weak society at the end of the day. That's always worth remembering.
Thank you. I think those are our questions so far. Ben, I think I'm handing back to you.
Well, thank you, Kiri, very much. I think all I will do is reiterate my thanks to all our speakers again and hand on to Mia if I've understood the program correctly. But I'm grateful to have the chance to express my appreciation to everybody. And Mia, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. And I'll join Ben by thanking everyone again, our panelists and our speakers. Lots of questions were targeted around what can you do, what can we do? So to reiterate what Ziba and all our panelists have said, first and foremost, don't be silent. Use your words, use your knowledge, use your access, use your resources to really speak out. But there are also some practical platforms through which you can do it. Here in the UK, we have the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign, and we will share the link with everyone, which provides a very good, I guess, comprehensive and good list of actions that you can take. If it's, for example, Jeff, you asked a question about the economic implications. There are 89 brands, high street brands, that are known to use either cotton or products made by Uyghur forced labor. take a stand, take a personal stand by making the right choices and not choosing these products, and challenging these companies, like H&M was challenged and therefore changed its practices, and Lacoste and Adidas. And let's make sure that all these companies change their practices and behaviors. So put pressure on companies, on retail and corporate companies. Companies like Airbnb, who's going to be one of the sponsors of the 22 Winter Olympics in China. Let's put pressure on the sponsor companies, sports companies, and challenge them on the decision to allow a country perpetrating of these genocidal acts from hosting an event like the Olympics. Ask your MP to speak out for Uyghurs. That's what our MPs are there for. There is a 5-point pledge where we ask each and every MP and each one of us to pledge to challenge China on an international platform, to make sure that the Magnitsky Act sanctions are applied on Chinese companies and Chinese individuals directly linked in committing these genocidal acts. Let's make sure that Uyghurs seeking refuge and asylum in the UK and any countries are granted that status so they can find safety here and then spend the rest of their worry on their family members. There's a GoFundMe for the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign, again, to make sure that this campaign can carry on and that we support Uyghur activists in the UK to take action and speak on behalf of their people and their experiences. There are weekly demonstrations taking place here in London outside the Chinese Embassy's cultural section. Join that and we can provide details for these demonstrations. And there's now a weekly demonstration organized across the country outside Volkswagen dealership shops. Volkswagen continues to deny the reality that it is holding or having a manufacturing plant in a region that's committing genocidal acts. It's the same company that in the 1940s denied the fact that it had production lines in a country that was committing genocidal acts, Germany in the 1940s. And of course, the Genocide Amendment Bill to the Trade Bill, which had lost by a very narrow margin in the House of Commons, but is coming back to the House of Lords on the 2nd of February. Put pressure on our lords, continue the conversation so that this amendment to the bill is passed and a court, a UK-based high court, will determine whether a trade agreement with a country is valid if that country is found committing genocidal acts. So there is a lot that could be done. A lot of these actions are available both on the Rene Cassin website, on CSW's website, on the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign website. And again, it's down to each and every one of us. So I would like you to please join me and CSW again in thanking our wonderful speakers, Ziba for sharing a personal story with us, Rabbi Wittenberg, Andrew Lord Williams, and Sonam for inspiring us with your respective faith reflections and on why we should act, Ben for chairing this and bringing us all together. And you know, we stand united. We stand united in our cry against the atrocities being committed against the Uyghurs, but we also stand united in the act that we can take together so that future Holocaust Memorial Days do not include the Uyghur people as one of the list of people whose genocide needs to be remembered and commemorated. So in these unusual times, I would like to wish everyone, please stay hopeful, stay helpful, but most importantly, stay human. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Good night.
Thank you.